It was actually kind of coincidental that I was in the middle of a teaching day and then a student was 5 minutes late. And so I just happened to look at my email and there's this email from the agency saying, do you want to be considered by this birth mother? And I just wrote yes. And I think there were not that many people who were able to just respond that quickly. And the social worker showed her those profiles and she picked me. And so then I got this call because I'd said yes at that point. And I got the call that said, you are a mom.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where we believe living with intention through a bucket list lifestyle is a great way to bring yourself personal joy. As you are crossing items off your list, you're actually filling up your bucket. The more items you cross off, the more joy gets added, until eventually your joy spills over into the lives of those around you. Now let's start crossing it off together. What's something on your bucket list that you want to do solo? Just you, nobody else. Is it a small trip? Is it buying something for yourself? But do you have something on your bucket list that you're taking on as a solo venture? Our bucket list storyteller today took on something major as a solo item on her bucket list. It took a lot of guts and courage for her to reach out and do this thing, because ultimately it wasn't about being solo. Let's learn what she did and start crossing it off. At this time, I'd like to welcome my guest, Michele Fiala. She describes herself as a writer, a mom, and a musician. Michele, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Roger.
Yeah, so tell our listeners, Michele, what did you cross off your bucket list?
I adopted a child as a single parent.
I'm a parent of 3, and I don't think I would necessarily go back and choose to do that, especially alone. So where did that come from for you? Why was that important? You know, it's not typical American family. So why was this important to you?
I'll say that now I kind of agree with you that it seems a little crazy now looking back. I think, I think some days, but I had always wanted to be a mom. I remember even when I was young, loving babysitting, loving kids, loving that energy, and really wanting to become a mom. And then I was in a marriage for a long time where my husband decided he did not want to be a parent. And we went through a lot of counseling through the years. He was a great guy, and it was really hard to make the decision, but I finally reached the age of 38 and I woke up and if I'm going to ever do this, I need to do this now. And I'd already had some health issues, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it biologically. So I had always felt like adoption, even when I was going to have the first surgery, the doctor was like, how do you feel about losing your fertility? And I said, fine, because if I ever want a child, I would feel great about adopting a child. So that to me was always something I loved the idea of, and loved the idea that someone would be chosen, grow up knowing that he was chosen. So I had an open adoption and my son knows about it. And so eventually I ended up leaving my marriage and then kind of going down the long road of home studies and all that sort of stuff to get set up to adopt a child. And then it happened really fast from there.
That's good to hear, because I've heard sometimes it takes a really long time. So before you actually did it, what were the people around you communicating to you? Were people excited for you? Were people, family, friends? What was their response to you wanting to cross this off your list?
People were really supportive. And my brother and sister-in-law, who had my niece 2.5 years before my son was born, the Christmas before my son was born, and I had no idea he was going to be born in March at that point, but they loaded me up with every kind of baby thing they had. My trunk was full, and they had, bassinet and all the clothes that when he was born then turned out to be too small because he was such a large child from the beginning, but it had so many of the things you need. And then friends also rallied around, and everybody was excited. And everybody said it's the best thing you'll ever do and the hardest thing you'll ever do. And they were certainly right.
Yeah. So did you have any fears? Was there anything that inside of you, I'm sure you had many, but what were a couple of things you're like, oh, I'm actually going to do this? What were some of the fears that you might have had?
I had tremendous fears, and it took me a long time to sort of pull the trigger, I guess you might call it, although that seems like a strange way to talk about having a child. But I was really afraid because my job is very busy, and I was very busy with my career, and I thought, how on earth am I going to fit everything in? And there's still days when I think, how on earth can I fit everything in? And I worried about just being able to do it because you're on duty 24 hours a day most of the time. You're it took a lot of years for him to start sleeping better. I just worried about not being able to handle illnesses and any special needs and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, a lot of the things that I feared have happened at this point, and I've written about some of them actually. Him having been hospitalized for respiratory failure when he was 9 months old, and then later having some just high activity, high needs things where we've gone through occupational therapy and all that sort of stuff. And the answer is just that you just figure it out as you go. You can't. I worried a lot about that stuff in advance. Like, what if that happens and how will I deal with it? And then at the time, you just don't have any choice. You do what you need to do. It's your child.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like typical parenting woes and concerns. Doesn't sound like they were more outside the realm, which is nice. So, walk us through the process of actually being able to do this. What were some of the first things you had to do, and what maybe was kind of the hardest or most frustrating part of the process for you?
I think overcoming the self doubt that we just talked about was the hardest part of the process. And I found the agency really quickly. I think even before I set out on the process, because a good friend of mine for many years had adopted her daughter through this agency. And it was only domestic infant, open adoption. And I just really liked the way that I liked the way things were run in that way. And when I talked to friends who had done adoption, having an open adoption, having some health records for your child, and access to just some history of the birth family, I think is really useful, as well as for your child's peace of mind, them knowing a little something, like we're now connected to his birth half sister and birth half brother. And that's just amazing. And I know Scott feels so accepted to have people in his life that are like him genetically also, as well as, of course, his whole family. But it's been really tremendous because for me also, because I've never seen two people who are as much like my son. When we met his birth brother, I was like, okay, so much makes sense now. And the birth brother's mom was saying, he can never sit down and eat a meal. And I was like, neither can Scott. They just run around all the time. But I digress from, I'm sorry, I did
It's
digress
all
from the
right.
question, which was what took the longest. So I figured out the agency, and then I started filling out the home study paperwork. And that's intimidating if you've never done that. And there is a whole lot to it. You have to do all these trainings for the state, and the trainings for the state were all about special needs teenagers with what is it where they can't attachment disorder. And it really had nothing to do with infants. I kind of wish I'd had some trainings that had something to do with the kind of adoption I was doing, but it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of online work. Then you have the social worker coming to your house and checking everything, so you want to make sure everything's set up. You have to get the right kind of fire extinguishers and all kinds of things. And during this whole process, then I would get to a certain point and I would just sort of just get overwhelmed and think, I can't handle this right now. And so it took me a long time to get through. And then once your home study is finally completed and approved, you have, I think it's 2 years to then be able to adopt from that. And the first year, I just stayed off the list. I just got really intimidated. I was also involved in a relationship at that time that I thought, is that going to go somewhere or not go somewhere? And would that affect the whole decision and timing? And then finally, I was like, okay, it's been a year and I've wasted a year after spending $3,000 to get this done and all this time. Then I'm going to get on this list. And I thought, well, it could take quite a while, so I might as well get on the list. And so then you take pictures and you have this booklet done, and it's like an advertisement for yourself, really, for yourself and your family. And yeah, and that's what the birth parents, that's what his birth mother looked at, who chose me then from this booklet
So,
about me.
so you didn't choose; they chose you.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you would
Yeah.
have more people choose you, would you then have the option to pick, or was it just it's you just sitting around waiting for someone to say yes to Michele?
You're waiting for someone to say yes, and I got a couple of calls before Scott. And the couple of calls I got were calls that I my heart was sad that I couldn't answer those calls, but it would be babies who were born at, say, 3 pounds and addicted to cocaine and those sorts of things that I didn't feel like I could handle. And I have huge admiration for the people who did take those children. And I'm sure they've had a wonderful life with them, but I didn't feel like as a sole parent I could handle that. So I was waiting until someone asked me who he was born at a healthy weight, full term, with a lot of, without addiction and that sort of thing, that I just felt like we're kind of over what I felt like I could handle. And so this was a really healthy pregnancy. And it was actually kind of coincidental that I was in the middle of a teaching day and then a student was 5 minutes late. And so I just happened to look at my email and there's this email from the agency saying, do you want to be considered by this birth mother? And I just wrote yes. And I think there were not that many people who were able to just respond that quickly. And the social worker showed her those profiles and she picked me. And so then I got this call because I'd said yes at that point. And I got the call that said, you are a mom. Come to Cincinnati and be in the hospital with your son. That was it.
So was that's super quick. I mean, that's like warp speed overdrive type of quick. I have so many questions. So was Scott born at that point? I mean, and so you weren't a part of that part of the process, right?
Correct. He was born at 11:43. I got the first email at 3:00, and then by 4:30, I was a mom. So then it took me 3 hours to get to Cincinnati. So it wasn't until that evening that I felt bad that he had been in the nursery for 9 hours. But now that we've had our whole lives together, I think it's probably okay for 9 hours.
Yes. Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show. Yes, wow. I'm very impressed. That's all I can say right now is I'm super impressed. I'm sure the car ride to Cincinnati was anxiety ridden, or at least I would be. So you show up at the hospital, and how are you feeling when you first see him? What's your reaction? Where's your mind at when it becomes uber real at that point?
I was so nervous. I mean, I was excited too, but I was so nervous. And some parents have told me I knew right away the second I saw them, and I was just like, which one is he? Just kind of peering in. I wrote in this a story in my blog actually about that I was really just sitting there because the nurse was out for a minute, and I'm staring in the nursery looking from baby to baby, thinking, I don't even know which one is mine. That wasn't exactly how I thought motherhood was going to go with which one is mine. And then I remember having him put in my arms, and it was very, very exciting. And it was very, very exciting first night. I was just sort of lit up on fire trying to handle everything and process everything and figure out how to deal with work and home, and just it was a total disbelief. I just remember it being such disbelief, and I he was amazing, and I was crazy about him right away, and we bonded very quickly. But I think you have to say I went through more shock, I think, than I expected.
So that's the first stage. Then how long was he there before you took him home?
He was there 2 days. And so we got a room. And so we were together for those 2 days, and I was feeding him. And I remember being so scared that first night because he was still spitting up amniotic fluid and he wasn't eating much. And I was like, oh, is my baby going to eat? And by the next day, he was eating twice as much as the nurses thought he was supposed to. And so he was a healthy kid and has grown by leaps and bounds. And so we got out in 2 days, and then I got to bring him home, and I had to, at that point, borrow a car seat because I didn't have a car seat yet. And so I borrowed a car seat to get him home. And I found that a friend of mine who had 5 kids had filled my entire screen porch with gifts. It just gotten everything that I could need to get started. And then other friends just started dropping by and just piling up the gifts and just, I mean, we got all kinds of stuff and they made it. Actually, a Jewish friend of mine had told me that it's a tradition not to buy anything for the baby until the baby's born and that you get everything. And that's exactly how it went. I had those things from my brother and sister-in-law. So I had some real basic stuff. And then everybody just started bringing all the stuff and everybody was so excited and so welcoming. And it was pretty amazing. It was just that first year definitely was the best year of my life. Like it was just so amazing to have this tiny little person and watch him growing. It's so incredible. And I felt like I was on top of the world at that point.
Can you tell us how long this has been for you now? How old,
He
Scott?
just turned 5.
5.
2 weeks ago, he
Okay.
turned.
Okay, so we've walked through this joyous experience of going and picking him up at the hospital, but as parents, we know like that's like a snapshot in a photo album that there's so much more to being a parent. So how has that process been from after bringing him home to, almost getting ready for probably preschool now or getting close to going to kindergarten? So how has that been for you? Was that different than you imagined it to be? I mean, every year is kind of different with a child, but how's that process been? Seeing the long haul, the 5 years, having a child's forever, but at least those first 5 years of that, how's that worked for you?
It's been a lot more up and down than I ever imagined. I think all parents can identify with that there are a lot of things you don't expect. Like I mentioned that when he was 9 months old and was in respiratory failure, that was really a big point for us. And he was hospitalized in the ICU, and that was such a hard time. And as far as, I have those mom fears of things with my child, and he's been very healthy since then, but that was a really hard time. And then those toddler years, man, they are challenging. So we had a lot more challenges. And it's been really amazing how much it's made me explore myself and how much it's made me go back into therapy and really open a lot of stuff with myself. Just finding that I am not the parent I thought I was going to be and the parent I hoped I would be. And I have a lot more personal stuff to deal with to not be triggered by my child so much. I think that's not an uncommon experience, but it was just kind of a shock just how much there was and how easy it was to be triggered, especially during the years of so much sleep deprivation when I just was sort of running at the edge of my own capacity. And I would find that I still find I lose my temper more than I would like to lose my temper. But I've definitely grown a lot as a person because I've gone back into counseling and I've really started consciously working on my own positive thinking too, and on exposing myself to positive influences. Writing that humor blog, of course, is something that writing I'd done for a lot of years for myself and then started making public. And that was just like this feeling of having a creative outlet during this time. And, you have to actually then really carve time out for yourself in a way that you've never had to try to do before you have a child. So there's just so much to it. And there are these, of course, amazing times with him and hilarious stuff with him. And then there's some just incredibly difficult times.
I was just gonna ask about you offered up that you have an open adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And so how's that been? What part has the birth mother or father played in Scott's life at this point?
Yeah, the birth mother was in contact with me fairly regularly in the beginning, and I would send pictures and things like that. And she and I have not had much contact in the last couple of years. And I would like to be able to reach, she changed her cell phone number, and I'd like to be able to reach out to her again. It was really pivotal in our lives that the social worker connected us with the two birth siblings who were also adopted by different families at birth.
Okay.
That's been huge. But I would like to have more contact with the birth mother, especially when Scott has some questions about her and even have pictures of her and things like that. But at least I have some information, so I'm able to talk about her. And I talked to Scott about that Bianca helped carry him in her belly because I wanted to be a mom and I couldn't carry a baby in my belly. And so she carried him in her belly so that I could be a mom.
Is there one piece of advice if someone overheard you telling your story in a cafe and said, "Oh, I've thought about adoption." What's like one thing that you would say to them to say, if you're going to do this, you got to do X?
Go through a lot of counseling.
No,
Yeah.
yeah,
Process everything in your life first.
yeah. I always used to joke that anybody can get a driver's, you have to take a test to get a driver's license, but anybody can just be a parent. And so it sounds like and I know that yeah, it'd be helpful if you work through some of your stuff for sure.
Hiring help is just crucial too. I mean, my dad moved while when Scott was young, and has been just huge in his life, being close to us, and we see him a lot. And then I have a couple of part-time nannies. I would love to have something like an au pair or something like that, somebody more full-time. The people I know who do that, it's really very helpful. You have no idea how much help you're going to need. And the more things you can outsource, the more you can hire somebody to make some meals and hire somebody to help you clean the house, then the better.
I appreciate you sharing this. This is definitely a personal journey for sure. And I'm excited that you shared with us today. Michele, what's something else on your butt? I mean, this is huge and probably mostly time consuming, adopting a child like this. But what's something else? You talked a little bit about taking care of yourself in this process. What else is on your bucket list?
Yeah, when you said that earlier, I thought I'll have a good answer by the time you ask it. Well, I would like to take him on some bigger trips now. Actually, this afternoon we have our interview at the passport office, and we haven't gone anywhere international since he was born. And obviously, since the pandemic, we've traveled a lot less. And I've been talking with family about going to some more islands and beaches, which I really love. And Scott's very excited. We went to Puerto Rico with the family in November, and I would love to take some other trips like that. And we've even talked about that specifically because we're a biracial family. My son is Black, that taking him to a Black majority island would be so cool to have him have that experience of not being in the minority as he is in, a small town in Ohio. So I think traveling more with him and traveling bigger places would be on my list next.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be huge. Michele, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your telling your story. Where can folks find more information about you or get connected with you online?
Momflysolo.com. So that's my blog. And there's also a podcast on Spotify and Apple, also called Mom Flies Solo. And I would love to have readers connect, and you can subscribe to the blog. And I'm happy to talk personally too. I try to keep in contact with my subscribers, and I'd love to hear from people.
And you wrote a book?
Well, I have 2 music books actually.
Okay.
So I'm also a musician and a music professor, and so I have 2 books about the oboe. Actually, one's published by Oxford University Press. So I think about the potential of a book of the Mom Fly solo type writings also in the future. That would be, maybe that's another one I'll put on my bucket list.
There you go. Yeah, that's a fun one, especially these days when self-publishing is so readily available. It's kind of nice to be able to do that at least once. Michele, thanks for being here, and I do wish you all the best. I hope that you get a chance to go to an island with Scott. I suggest the Dominican Republic, but that's just me. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's very inspiring, and best wishes to you.
Thank you so much for having me today.